The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be giving a little bit of additional time for folks to come in, as some people are just logging in right now. We're going to give it about 60 seconds, so a little bit after 1:02 p.m. we will begin. I'll see you shortly. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country, and welcome to today's webinar presentation brought to you by Transfinder in partnership with NAPT. Today is going to be the second webinar in our Going Back to School Before the Kids series, a continuation of last week's topic. My name is Andrew Hamilton. I'm the Senior Application Specialist with Transfinder Corporation, and I'm just going to take us through the first couple of steps of today's webinar. I will also be in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll be able to interact with you there. We want you to take advantage of the fact that this is an interactive session. We will have question and answer and panel discussion at the end. So if you want to express any questions or concerns as we go on, please use the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And I'll keep an eye on that. Rick from our side, we'll keep an eye on that as well, and we'll see about answering any questions or addressing any concerns that you have as we proceed. Now, if you've been to any of these webinars or any of these previous pieces of this series before, well, you may be familiar with the fact that we start off with a few words from the Transfinder President and CEO, Tony Sabatelli. Then we'll move on to Mike Martin, who will introduce today's topic and panelists. We'll have a quick, or rather not a quick, but a presentation on going back to school before the students, and then we'll wrap things up today with a panel discussion. So following true to our first bullet there, I'd like to hand the microphone over to Tony Sabatelli for a few words. Take it away, Tony.
All right. Hello, everybody. And I love the passing the microphone. We actually should do one of these things. Feels like we're passing a real microphone and all that. I can't wait till we're all hanging out together and seeing each other. So welcome everybody, and good morning and good afternoon here in the East Coast of the United States. I'd be excited to be on the number eight best practices webinar that we've held in partnership with NAPT. And guys, remember there used to be this TV show when I first came to the United States. It was a show that was called 8 is Enough. Well, we believe that 8 is not even enough yet. Obviously, we're going to be doing multiple of these sessions, and today's webinar is titled Return to School Roadmap, Part Number 2. Again, it's being part of this Going Back Before the Kids Come Back. It's the series. And by the way, the sequels sometimes are better than the original. You guys remember the movie The Godfather? Second part was so awesome. Robert De Niro is such a great actor. He did such a great job. And how about Rocky? There's so many sequels. Maybe toward the end, maybe it could have been improved. But man, I could watch those all the time. But back to the webinar here. It's it promises to be filled again with tons of information. And really, it's the driving force on how we're going to get back to school and how we're going to do it in a safe manner. So you're talking about some people are doing a lot of thinking. There's so much going on. I believe this is going to be another record-breaking attendance, the crowd. So maybe toward the end, we'll just give you an update. But the numbers from last week was just amazing. So clearly, people want to know more information. And a lot of people have been asking about, hey, there's a PowerPoint you guys had last week. And by the way, here at Transfinder, we're actually using that same document to educate our clients and people that are calling us saying, hey, where's that document? We're sharing it. But guys, just in case you missed it, there's a document out there. It's anchored off our homepage on transfinder.com. There's a huge page now that you just scroll down all these webinars we've been doing things with, of course, with NAPT, and it's just amazing. There's so much. I actually forget how much documents are in there myself. So if you guys forget something and there's some documents, all these webinars, and even today, just so you know, it's going to be there because the data is amazing. A little scary that you're actually, the thinking of all the possibilities, all the what if scenarios, but it's there and it's very useful. I got to continue praising the leaders here and the National Transportation Associations. I've noticed it's keep going here, right? It's several weeks, and now we're talking about the third month at this point that we're a remote company, but everyone stepped up. It doesn't even matter that we're working, whether we're at our house or some of you guys are still going back to work and keeping the social distancing in check, but amazing going on, amazing things. I want to, again, special recognition to Mike Martin, of course, and NAPT for really the way you've led this industry. And this crisis will end. We know it. When it's going to end, we don't know for sure, but we're making all these these what if scenarios based on what's going to look like. So again, you guys you're innovators. This is what people have been looking for in the leadership, and clearly you guys are the leaders, and we're so proud to be with you guys. So now I want to pass the mic, virtually pass the microphone to Mike. And again, Mike, thank you for working together on this real serious issues that we're trying to solve here together. So here's a mic.
Great.
Mike.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Last week, we offered a webinar that featured NAPT's Region 3 Director Brad Aemisegger, who explained the return to school roadmap that he and Jim Regan of Capital Works Consulting developed for the Toledo Public Schools. It was one of our most popular and highly rated webinars to date. Today, the two of them will take a deeper dive and discuss the nitty-gritty on a variety of operational issues. I believe that the Toledo Public Schools is the first school district in America to release its comprehensive return to school roadmap. It contains a wealth of information, including guiding principles that can be used by educational leaders to ensure they provide educational environments that are conducive to learning while maintaining the safety and security necessary for students, faculty, and other staff. After today's session, you will receive an actual copy of the recommendations to the Toledo Public Schools regarding such topics as social distancing and workplace safety at the transportation facility, avoidance of infection, education and compliance issues to ensure driver safety, and student management and compliance issues to ensure driver safety as well. So without further ado, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you Brad Aemisegger and Jim Regan. Guys, take it away.
Hey, okay, Andy, let's begin. Next slide, Andy. Okay, good day and greetings, everybody, both U.S. and Canada, based on last week's attendance. Since this is part two, we have to start with the summary. And for those who are here for the first time, we'll spend a minute or two on summarizing last week. But we covered the concept of readiness and the key elements of the roadmap. We highlighted the content elements, and Brad and I built 8 modules that comprise the roadmap. This week, we're going to go talk about the delivery of that roadmap. Section 3.1 can be watched in its entirety on YouTube or on the Transfinder or the NAPT link. So let's go and do a quick review of last week's concepts. Go ahead, Andy. Next. Okay. What Brad and I were starting to do is build a COVID-related return to work plan. Go back one. Okay. And what Brad and I started out doing was saying, hey, what are the requirements that a transportation department needs to reopen? So what we did is we developed a series of policies that need to be revisited. So Brad would say, hey, I need some guidance on these policies to reopen. And then from that, we also identified some requirements for an actual COVID-related readiness plan. The policy decisions not only affect the readiness plan, which is going down on the slide, but going up, the policy decisions impact the operational side as well. But then on the COVID side, we identified the modules that you see in the middle. And once school opens up, you'll be managing your business in a traditional format with the added responsibility of managing compliance to all the COVID new elements that you may have in your operation. Next slide. So what we looked at were some scenarios last week, again, at the conceptual level. One of the top policies we identified that needs clarification is whether social distancing will be applied at the schools. If it does, it will reduce class size and have a significant impact on the scheduling of the students. And we started looking at different kind of scheduling scenarios where they, you can split the schedule by grade, you can split it by class size. But if you start splitting schedule, you're running the same routes twice. You're probably going to optimize things after about a month of operating, but you end up with 2 times the mileage, 2 times the fuel, double the preventive maintenance activities, and twice the labor. Drivers got to carry the same kids, so there's twice the driver risk. You're cleaning buses maybe after every run or at least once a day. And the fact that you're running during the day means you have less time for maintenance. There also has been some talk about running school 6 days a week. Have half the school go on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the other half on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, in a longer school day. In that case, you're running standard routes once a day for 6 days. Again, you'd optimize later on. There's about a 20% impact on cost, and you're kind of running the standard risk, and it will feel like an operation just running 6 days. Next slide. That's good. Then we also looked at some other creative options. One of them was, what if within a district they apply social distancing on an a la carte basis? That is, if a school has no cases, do they run a normal schedule? And maybe if a school has, passes a threshold, then they split it. They run it, maybe they run a split schedule for 2 weeks until the cases go down, and they come back to normal. So again, there's been some research on that subject. But if they run the regular schedule, great. But if one of the schools in a route set goes above the threshold, you'd be running a hybrid schedule, which is more like an on-demand. It would have a variable impact on cost and a variable impact on risk. In either case, your routing has to be sound, but you got to prepare for volatility. Okay, Andy, next. In the last week, since Brad and I have been working together, the notion of phasing in a school opening has emerged in the press. Brad and I started looking at a phased opening model. There are articles about the subject in the UK and Denmark, and they would start with opening with special needs kids and maybe selected grades, potentially K through 3, because those kids, if those kids were in school, the parents could go to work. As of yesterday, and all the research we've done, we've not identified any detailed phasing models. It's still pretty much at the conceptual phase. But to Brad and I in Toledo, a phased-in approach may impact the initial ridership volumes, but really the in-school social distancing decision is still the schedule and driving determiner. So what I'm going to do now is, as we promised in the agenda, move into the 8 readiness roadmap modules and have Brad walk through the details. So Brad, to you, and Andy, slide change.
Next slide, Andy. There you go. So we looked at a day in the life of the school transportation department. And for us, we came up with 8 areas that we were going to delve into: facility, vehicles, driver safety, student safety, shop safety, department management, the additional fleet, and parent and community. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. Back one. There you go. Along with those 8 modules, we had to look at 3 areas within inside each one of those modules. So we had to look at policy requirements, infrastructure, and operational requirements. So it's like a 3D perspective that's going to impact our timelines, as you'll see later. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. All right, the first one we're going to look at is facilities. Toledo Public Schools specifically, we have a very small building, and we have about 270 some people show up at one compound. So for us, we have no space interior wise to practice social distancing. So we're going to look at eliminating our driver lounge. We're looking at putting workstations out in that driver lounge. Right now, we currently have 6, eliminating that down to 2 for our bus drivers to utilize. We have a manual clock-in device. We are looking at a mobile app that we're going to incorporate next year so that the drivers don't need to be inside the building to clock in. We're looking at a one-way traffic pattern through our building, so they would enter in through the west side of the building, do what they need to do, and then exit out the east side of the building. Our goal is to keep the drivers out of the building as much as possible. And then we're also going to look at our cleaning and disinfecting schedule. And I purchased 2 of the electrostatic technology sprayers just for ease of use and quickness. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. So if you look at our workspace organization, we're going to develop a hybrid solution where currently Toledo Public Schools is allowing staff to work from home. If that continues into the start of next school year, we would like to utilize individuals working from home, and then anyone that cannot perform their job duties from home will need to come into the facility. If we need all of our staff inside the facility at one time, we're definitely going to have to move workstations. This slide shows what workstations are going to have to be moved. We also need to look at our group training, how we do that currently. That's going to be moved off site to allow for more social distancing among our groups. Our staff in services, we usually perform twice a month on Fridays. We're looking at currently doing those with either a Zoom or a YouTube tape session to where our individuals would log on from home and view those and participate district-wide analysis of airflow and ventilation. That's not being done by me personally. That's a separate department will handle that for all of our buildings. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Andy. There you go. Next is vehicles. So when you look at vehicles, you're looking at the maintenance crew and the drivers. For us, we're going to clean them at least at a minimum every night. Disinfect buses by a schedule, so whether that's after each run or only in the evenings. Our high touch areas, like where the students walk up the steps, we'll have disinfectant wipes the driver can use to hit those areas. Our wheelchair and lift bus areas, we'll use those disinfectant wipes to clean them after each run. For Toledo Public Schools, PPE in our eyes is basically gloves and a mask. So we're looking to try to provide gloves for sure and possibly masks. We've asked our employees to supply their own mask at this time. Disposable disinfectant wipes, the department's going to have on each bus and available to the drivers inside the building. And our driver training on COVID infection control, we're going to put that and laminate it and put it inside the driver for a checkoff list if they have any questions. And then the biggest one is hand cleanliness. We're going to have alcohol-based hand and sanitizers throughout the building and available small bottles for the drivers to take on their bus. Next slide. So when you look at virus protection, there's two parts, reception and transmission. So I'll go through reception first. Issuance of PPE equipment for everybody. Safety training on COVID-19 to focus on cleaning the driver area of the bus, because bus drivers, they're not trained professionals on how to maintain a clean environment. So we need to supply some training for that. Social distancing monitoring. If you've noticed any of the cities that are opening up, everybody's in groups. So we need to get our staff trained for social distancing. We need to update our student discipline procedures. We're also looking at the use of a face shield for our drivers when students are boarding and unboarding. Integrate COVID hygiene practices as part of our student bus safety training. We need to look at our special needs student management procedures to see where anything needs to be updated. The district has not decided what they're going to do about student mask usage, so that's still in the discussion stages. Student social distancing while boarding and unboarding buses is always a difficult one, but we need to maintain some type of social distancing. Allowing drivers to clock in via the mobile app for us is going to be a big one. Drivers will come in, they'll use their smartphones, they'll clock in, go right to their vehicle, no need to come inside the building. Anyone that doesn't have a smartphone, then they'll be inside the building to clock in. And accelerated driver testing and bus cleaning. If someone is diagnosed with COVID, either a student on that bus or a driver, we'll have seating charts to assist with any tracking. Next slide. The transmission piece, we're going to require our drivers to analyze themselves at home before coming to work. Hopefully they're going to take their temperature. Our COVID-19 testing after display of symptoms, that's a district-wide concern. So that's decisions will be made above my pay grade. Maintaining social distancing protocols. Education on COVID symptoms. It's amazing what staff really doesn't know what all the symptoms are. Hand sanitizers, I can't say enough. Having hand sanitizer available to all your staff is very important. Updated management protocols for severe bus behavior, for incidents, fights on the bus. How are those going to be handled now? Requiring physician clearance for return to work after a positive diagnosis of COVID. Review and adjust our CBA language for leave time for employees if they're self-quarantining. All that's being reviewed right now and may change in the future. And how we handle our bus breakdown procedure and our bus accident procedure when there's multiple individuals outside of our department on the scene. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Andy. There you go. When you look at the student safety, sequential seating, so when the students board, we'll fill the back seats up first and work our way towards the front. And then when the kids get off, front will get off first and then work your way back. Our student discipline guidelines, we definitely need to review those and see where we can tighten that up with the COVID-19 scares. Our daycare policy currently is we transport from all daycares. Currently in Ohio, all daycares are closed and we don't know when they're going to open up daycares. But when they do, how are we going to handle pulling up to a daycare and having massive students try to board the bus? We're going to identify our high ridership routes and try to level and balance as much as possible. We have a very large concern with our early childhood education transportation. Those students, those buses, 3 to a seat, they're smaller. That's something we need to look at, and we're not sure where we're going to go with that. Dedicated compliance, how are we going to audit what we're doing right now? We need to develop training materials for both students and parents. And our high impact students, our very severe special needs students, how are we going to handle them in the future? For instance, the student that spits. Can you legally have a face shield on the student? Probably not. So you're going to have to equip your staff with PPE of some type to help protect them. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. Safety summary. Safety is going to be in layers, how Jim and I looked at it. So if you look at the parent side, it's necessary that they take precautions and protect their children. When you look at the staff, the member must take the necessary precautions to protect themselves. The department, we're trying to do everything we can to come up with what scenarios we're going to have when we open up schools and what can we put in place to be ready for that. The district as a whole, what regulations and what policies need to be changed for the district to operate. And then you have your state Department of Health and Education that's constantly developing guidelines and updating policies. So it's a collaborative effort amongst all these individuals that it's going to make for a comprehensive and safe opening for students next school year. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. When you look at shop requirements, we work 24/7. We have 3 shifts, 3 guys to a shift. So for us, social distancing while the guys are in the shop bay should not be a problem. But you've got to look at when they collaborate on maintenance, how is that going to look? Are they going to require face masks, shields, whatever that's going to be? When your shop guys go to the back, what are you going to do for parts management? Are they to wear gloves? Is that area going to be cleaned on a regular basis? Think about how you go to the grocery store right now and how things have changed from the first time you went to where it's at right now. What are you going to do when a mechanic goes out to the bus to drive it into the bay to work on it? You know, does the mechanic expect the driver to have it cleaned, or are you going to expect your mechanic to clean that area before he drives it in? Your common shop areas, how's that going to be disinfected? Our shop, we supply all tools. So after a mechanic's done working with a tool, we're going to require a disinfectant of the tool before he puts it away. Their locker room is technically where they also eat their lunch. So that area is going to need to be cleaned and disinfected on a more regular basis than in past. And I'm always mentioning hand sanitizer. So if you're not able to get to soap and water, hand sanitizer is a main item. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. The hard, difficult spot, how are we as managers going to manage our staff moving forward? And you look at everything that we do, how are we going to run meetings? Are they going to be done online? Employee meetings. When someone needs to have a coaching and counseling session at your desk, does there need to be a sneeze shield involved? Will there be masks required by both the supervisor and the employee? Training. When we perform training currently, everybody was in a lounge area, 40, 50 people. That's not practicing social distancing. So where are you going to hold your training sessions? Workspace organization, our driver trainers, there were 4 people in a room that was probably 10 by 12. Moving forward, we can't do that. How are we going to spread these individuals out? Office equipment. Cleaning your office equipment after every use, your copiers, the phones, anything that's shared. Do we need to go out and purchase additional equipment so things do not have to be shared? Our onboard instructors, when they do the evaluations of drivers, practicing social distancing, but they also need to be observant of all the drivers' actions while they're driving to make sure everything they're doing is what they're supposed to. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. When you look at additional fleet, you're looking at, we call it white fleet, that's your support vehicles. We maintain those. You're looking at your activity buses. early childhood education buses, smaller, higher density students, multiple users on your white fleet. If you've got two guys riding in a maintenance van together, how are you going to do that? Our department's majorly involved with the other departments on the use of their vehicles, so it's going to be a collaborative effort between our department and the other departments to come up with guidelines on cleanliness. And a big one, right now in Ohio, we have no idea what fall athletics is going to look like, if they're going to have it. But when you think about transporting your football team, you're going to have multiple buses now if you practice social distancing. So instead of having 2 or 3 buses to support the football team, is that going to be doubled? Can you support that increase of vehicles to transport those additional students? All that needs to be looked at. Another area we use our regional carrier. It's called TARTA, to transport a lot of our students within Toledo Public Schools. We need to work collaboratively with them. They're tied to DOT regulations, but they're also transporting students. So we need to work with them to come up with policies and procedures on how we're going to protect our students while on those buses. Are they going to need to wear masks? How often is that bus sanitized? That's all the things we need to look at. Next slide. Go ahead. Up. Parent communication. For us to be successful, parents need to feel that their students, when they board our bus, are going to be safe. If you've read any articles, that's a big concern on the parents right now. If I send my child to school next year, are they going to be safe? And that's the bus, that's the building, that's them walking to school. There's a lot of concerns on the parents' end. So for us, we need to communicate out what our cleaning procedures are for our vehicles. How are we disinfecting? What's our driver safety program look like? What we expect from our students moving forward, and are those regulations, can we, even though we create a policy, are the kids going to be able to follow it? Are our expectations too high? Parents must be informed and educated about all the efforts that Toledo Public Schools Transportation Department and District are going to do, so those parents trust us to educate their children. Next slide. For parent communication, when Jim and I looked at that, it's going to be in multiple different areas. You're looking at social media, you're looking at PSA announcements, hopefully on TV. You're looking at reaching out to your TV stations and, hey, can you do some special coverage on what we have coming up? Whatever software you use, we use Bus Bulletin to push out information to our parents, mailings to parents. Another item we need to look at is the potential use of a transportation consent form. So whatever regulations and policies we change for student transportation, we send them to the parents to sign off. Another area we look at, Toledo Public Schools has open houses before school starts in that first week of school. Maybe taking our buses and having staff there to help guide parents through what we're doing, that one-on-one contact. Next slide. Go ahead, Andy. At this time, I'd like to turn it back to Jim Regan.
Okay, so then we had to take all of those tactics and action items and put them into a timeline. And so we'd actually have a project plan to work with, to communicate to the board, and to go forward. Earlier, Brad mentioned the 3 dimensions about policy, infrastructure, and operations in terms of 3 categories of requirements. As we did that and we started looking at the implementation, there was sort of a natural sorting. The policy items have the longest lead time because they're linked to the school board calendars and the superintendent meetings, and those are only held once a month or less frequently. So unless you get a decision at an earlier one, sometimes you have to wait a long time before you get another bite at the apple to get a decision. So we wanted to start those in the month of May. So when you look at the timeline, all the policy items are front loaded. The infrastructure items can have significant lead times. What Brad talked about, migrating to a mobile app for clocking in involves training, involves setting things up, moving workstations, getting buildings and grounds to rewire workstations, developing training programs all take considerable time. So in the schedule, you'll see most infrastructure items starting in June. And then most of the operational items, they're in your wheelhouse, and you can be scheduled with sufficient lead time to be prepared for the start of service at the beginning of the school year. The developing of those were scheduled to the start in July. So as you look at the timeline, it's front loaded with policy. The middle of it is mostly your infrastructure items, and your operational items that kind of link to the drivers coming back to the workplace are scheduled for development in July, and we developed a roadmap based on a 12-week time frame. So it was May, June, and July. That gave us a couple of buffer weeks. Schools in Toledo normally start in the middle of August, but there was some communication that they might want to start school earlier. So we tried to using a 12-week plan. If your school, starts in September or later, you can play with the timeline and expand it accordingly. Next slide. Andy, there we go. What I'm going to do, instead of going through the timeline for each individual item, because you'll be sent the timeline, it'll be in Excel, so you can change the colors, you can do all sorts of fun things if you want to. What we did is we listed each of the action items in the first column. You'll see if there's a policy requirement for each of those. So any item that required a policy, you'll see that it's shaded in week 9 because that's the front loading part. Anything that Brad can do independently, kind of loaded towards the start of school. When you see them both shaded in, those are cases where Brad may need some air cover, or there'll be some influence from the board. For example, sequential seating or seating charts, that may depend on what the board's view on contact tracing might be. So if they have a fairly rigid contact tracing, then obviously seating charts will be mandatory. Next slide. Okay, as you go through each of the categories in the timeline, again, you can see by looking at the visual, in week 9 is the policy stuff. In weeks 8 through 4, the 4 middle weeks of the summer, it's mostly your infrastructure items. And when drivers start coming back from school, you'll see the items that are related to where you need the driver's involvement, or you're doing little on-site training or the orientation. So again, the timelines we built was policy up front, infrastructure in the middle, and operations at the end. Next slide. Now, what we also did is we took every single action item, of which there was about 134 of them, and we created a survey or a discussion tool, and we put it in Excel, and it's called a School Transportation Readiness Plan. I think Mike Martin and NAPT might have sent that out to those who attended the first session. So if you didn't get it, contact NAPT, and maybe Mike, you can send it again to everybody on this one. The goal was to develop a discussion guide for you to have when you meet with your board, your administration, or your staff. The way we built the tool was column A has all of the questions, about 134 of them, sorted by the 8 modules plus the policy section. We had a drop-down menu so that you can highlight what the decision level for that item was. So whether in your district it was a board decision, or whether it was an admin decision, or whether it was your decision as the transportation director. Column C is for the response to the questions, and column D was the drop-down menu for the status of the response. I know Brad and I had a meeting with his deputy superintendent, and he said, well, number 1, that's a definitive answer. Number 2, he said, well, that's my opinion for the moment, but I'm not quite sure. So we added an opinion category, or whether it was currently under review by the board. Okay. So again, this was distributed to first session attendees. If you're attending for the first time, contact NAPT for a copy. And now for the big close, go ahead. Brad and I in our conclusion kind of said urgency is needed. We couldn't sit back. We want to inform the administration of our policy requirements now. We covered those, and there are 13 of them in section 1. Again, we walk through the typical day for every role. So we put ourselves in the shoes of a driver, walk through a day that they did last year, but walk through the day and say, what would change with COVID? What would change with the router? What would change with the dispatchers? What would change with the mechanics? You can start now with the operational level compliance element. The stuff that's non-policy, you can start working on those right away. You can start ordering your supplies now. Brad and I are looking at the supply chain for masks and gloves. There was a backlog in ordering sprayers, so don't delay in ordering the supplies. Start your workspace analysis now. You can kind of anticipate reconfiguring or adding new technology to maintain the distancing. You can start developing your updated SOPs and your training programs. And then after all this is done, and after the administration decisions, Brad and I, our next step is we'll be rebuilding Brad's budget, to identify the cost impact of the decisions that come down from the board. Maybe in a future session, we can talk about cost, but right now, we're not quite in a position to do that because we're still awaiting some board decisions. And on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Rick and Mike for the Q&A session. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, Jim and Brad. That was so much information, and you did not disappoint. I don't know, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I don't see myself on screen, but that's probably a gift for you guys. Oh, there we go. I just wanted to, first of all, bring Mike Martin. Thank you. I know you have a bunch of questions. I see a ton of questions I've jotted down here as well from attendees as well as my own. I think Tony may have been right that the sequel was even better than the original. I don't know. I mean, you guys covered a lot of ground. When we mentioned it before, a lot of people, the number one question that we're getting from attendees, there's a lot of thoughtful ones, but the number one question is, how can I get my hands on this PowerPoint? So that says a lot about your preparation here. We'll have it on Transfinder.com. I know NAPT will make it available as well to all the attendees. If you missed last week, you can still watch it and catch all those slides as well. So all this material is available to everybody. Before I get into the first question, I wanted to, there's a story in the Wall Street Journal this morning, lead story, with the headline, "Is it safe to reopen schools? Europe is about to find out." And it starts off with this quick lead. The world is trying to figure out how to reopen schools during a coronavirus pandemic. In Europe, millions of children are returning to classrooms, turning the continent into a giant lab for what works and what doesn't. And then it goes into some of the specific areas, such as what's the science about how children can become infected and spread it to others? Should young children or older ones restart school first, and why? So like Germany and Hungary, for instance, reopen schools with older children first. Younger children in Germany are going to follow, but France and Poland did it the exact opposite way, bringing younger children in first. Questions about masks. There's no consensus on that. So my first question to you actually is related to that. How much are you even just watching what's happening around the globe, and how does that play into some of your decision making for the U.S.? That can be either one of you guys.
Like I said last session, one of the first things Brad and I do every morning is we Google reopening as a topic. We're benchmarking other industries, airlines in particular. There's been some great articles about what airlines are doing in terms of boarding passengers and passenger management. Some of it has conceptual application to the school bus world. But we Google reopening every day, and we're looking for best practices to incorporate in the plan. We encourage everyone to do the same.
Has there been talk about, separating when children arrive, so older kids first, younger kids second, or is it always all students same time? We're opening all school?
I'll echo your thought. I think in Denmark and England, they're thinking putting the younger kids first, because those are the kids that are linked to parents being able to go back to work and their child care. So the energy I'm hearing is younger kids first, so parents can go back to work. High school kids and older kids can self-manage themselves. Again, you're saying that's flipped in Germany.
Yep.
in terms of looking at dropping kids off on a split schedule, we've looked at dropping the kids off on one end of the building and picking up kids on the back end of the building to help buildings manage their student flow, to manage social distancing. So a lot of it depends, like we said in the first session, it depends on what your district will do about social distancing. That's the first domino that'll start knocking all the rest down. Brad?
Brad, anything else?
So for us, you just have to be fluid, because whatever you put into place, like what I read 2 weeks ago, is already starting to change. I read an article this morning that was sent to me, and it talked about the younger school-age students. They don't think that they transmit the virus like an adult does. So if that study continues in the next couple months, they realize that, hey, students can be in school and they're not transmitting the disease like an adult. You may see changes on what we anticipate right now. You may see changes in September, October on schools. That's the biggest thing, is just be flexible.
Okay. Mike? You got a question?
So if I may, let me plumb that just a little bit. All right. You mentioned in last week's presentation that the federal government, the CDC in particular, and maybe the WHO, your state Department of Health and others, and then your local departments of health were three sources that you consistently look to. How do you reconcile some of these other sources that you're seeing with those federal sources? How would you encourage people across the country to look at this? Various states are approaching this in various ways. Clearly that's the Ohio mentality was kind of federal, state, local. Is that something you'd recommend nationwide, or maybe something different?
So for me, on the transportation end, one thing that's made me able to sleep at night and go through my day, what can I control? So for me, when at my level, I can't worry what the federal government's going to do. The federal government's going to push down whatever they're going to push down. When you get closer, for me, I got to look at the state level. What's my governor doing? And then what guidance is my governor giving, like Northwest Ohio? And then Northwest Ohio, what are they giving my superintendent? So I can't, no matter what's happening at the federal level or at the governor level, what's happening locally for your district in your county.
If I may, a follow-up question to that too. You also mentioned last week that immediately subsequent to the presentation, you were going in to talk to your school business official. How'd it go? Well, what was the reception?
So Jim and I worked together on the presentation. So he got both pieces at one time. And the way my boss works, he liked the presentation, but he said, can you give me something that we can work through as a group that I can use to push down answers to you and use for myself as he works up through the chain. That generated the questions. So we took the PowerPoint and changed that into all those questions.
Super.
So one of the questions that I'm going to drill a little deeper, because this was a topic that you touched on that several people had different angles to the question. Peter Lawrence asked this specifically, was to you, Brad, how will the district evaluate drivers for fitness if the staff is not required to check in inside the office? Others asked the same thing about drug and alcohol use and that kind of thing. So how are you evaluating drivers?
So in my mind, the way we'll do that will be, instead of having staff inside the building, we're going to need to have our staff outside. So that'll help monitor social distancing. The hardest part, when you look at alcohol and drug, that's more of a conversation, or you're looking at how their behaviors are that day. So if you're trying to practice social distancing and you're trying to stay 6 foot apart, it's going to be hard to smell alcohol in somebody's breath, but you need to find a way to do that. So with us, it'll be our onboard instructors out in the parking lots, just making sure everybody's doing what they should be doing. And our supervisors, I have 6 total supervisors spread out throughout the day. Those supervisors will be more visible outside. So that's how we're.
I got a real-time question in response to that, I think. Kenneth asked how the drivers get their keys. So is that where they're meeting them outside, or are they gonna?
Our compound's secured pretty well, so our drivers leave all their keys in the bus overnight.
Okay. And Mike, feel free to jump in. Denise is asking this question about when you're performing some of these duties, such as cleaning the buses and other types of things in the midst of the virus epidemic here. Is there hazard pay during this time?
So on ours, no hazard pay at this point. Everybody's just their normal hourly wage. There has been discussions from the union level up, but there hasn't been any decisions made to pay anybody hazard pay.
Want to go back to a conceptual question again too, to maybe take one step back. Jim, you alluded to something you called the compliance audit. You want to do me a favor, please, and maybe expand on that, how you view compliance audits fitting into the infrastructure here?
Yeah, the notion is that once you put all these new SOPs or guidelines in place, the question is, like anything from a management viewpoint, you have to monitor. And because, if you don't monitor them, you don't reinforce them, people can start avoiding them. So if you're lax on the monitoring, you're going to get lax results. So Brad's got cameras on his facilities so we can monitor activities in the parking lot if the drivers are grouping or not. We're going to have to develop a checklist. We can look at camera systems on the buses, to monitor how the driver, if we decide to use face shields, is the driver using the face shield? If we're doing assigned seating on the buses, are kids sitting where they're supposed to? But I think that we're using camera systems for one phase of the compliance, and then obviously on the other side, if there's infractions, that's where you talked about updating discipline procedures for both staff and drivers, because he has a CBA agreement in place. They'll have to update the discipline side of the house as well. So one is the monitoring, and the back end is the discipline.
Okay. Again, frame of reference for people, right? If you're going to be updating, for example, student discipline policies and procedures, time frame for that, something that requires board approval, something that can be done inside the department, about collaboration between the two. Talk about that as a time frame reference.
So for Toledo Public Schools, the staff that I have to work with in the other departments, their calendar year will end June 30th. So whatever I need to put in place, I need to have at least those initial conversations in a rough draft submitted to them prior to June 30th. They come back on August 1st, technically, so that any policy changes that I could make at my level or at that department level for student services, we could have in place by August 1st.
Super, cool.
Our school starts mid-August.
So Brad and Jim, you guys are both known for doing, really, and you guys bear it out in today's presentation, amazing data analytics in Toledo. I'm just wondering what you're going to use to measure, to basically to monitor the success of this readiness plan. How are you gonna measure this?
I'll let Jim answer that one.
Obviously, there's going to be the creation of some new metrics. But I think that when Brad and I talked about data analytics relative to COVID, the first thing is we have a pretty exhaustive set of existing metrics. So we can look at the effect all of the procedures have on your current metrics. So what's social distancing on boarding going to do to your on-time performance for your vehicles? Is that going to roll back to your routing and how you route? Do you allow more times at a stop? We'll be monitoring, obviously, the ridership. You monitor that now, but our parents got to, drive our kids to school in the morning. So you may have a kind of a disproportionate number of kids to take home in the afternoon, as opposed to in the morning where parents don't want to drop their kids off, but they can't pick them up. Absenteeism, we'll be monitoring that, obviously, on the driver's side. So, part of it is to look at the impact that COVID will have on our existing metrics. But in terms of some new metrics, when Mike asked about the compliance question, obviously you're measuring the number of infractions that may occur in terms of compliance. Would be a new set of metrics as we go forward. Is probably the biggest one. It's just like it's sort of like a safety. So we look at some of the new metrics as enhancing our safety metrics, and that's probably the category we'll do it on. So I think phase one will be the impact COVID has on existing metrics, and as we go forward, we'll be enhancing our safety metrics around the compliance.
Troy, I think we're going to have to bring you back at some point as we put some of these things in place. Some value here. Mike, were you going to say something?
No, be my guest.
So how about the price issue? You get approached by your business manager, Brad, and he's asking you to price. He or she's asking you to price this out. How are you going to do that?
So right now you can price out gloves, masks, equipment that you're going to purchase, but until you get some direction on what your actual transportation is going to look like in the fall, it's tough to cost out those pieces. So you're going to look at the different scenarios. Are we going to have a split day? What's those additional route hours like? Is there going to be additional maintenance required? And you're going to do your best based on those educated guess scenarios. But until you get a concrete, this is what we're going to do, at least eliminate it down to 2, maybe. Because right now, I've heard 4 different scenarios out there, just, through the news. And until a school district can narrow it down to at least 2, it's tough to cost out specific, but you can get close. Just looking at options out there.
That's great. Well, we're getting close to the end, and I thought I'd like you guys to give me, and we'll go just down the line, Brad, Jim, and Mike. If you could give us, a takeaway. Again, there are so many people, I keep getting these saying, I need to get my hands on this. So I can't make it more clear. Mike, maybe you can address it as well. Everybody who wants this data will be able to get it in their hands, print it out, be able to use it in their own districts. So Brad, what's the takeaway?
You're killing me on this. My phone is going off like crazy right now. Everyone who's on the thing, you're going to get an email from us as a follow-up with an opportunity to download this. Don't stress.
That's good. That's very good. Can't say it enough. So Brad, what's one takeaway that you want people who are on this webinar to bring with them when they go back to the office?
So when I look at this and I look at all the different scenarios, and you start to think about how am I going to purchase buses, how am I going to hire additional staff, the communication for me with my superiors is going to be, whatever you decide to do, I may not be able to meet your expectations 100%. Here's what I can do. Here's my anticipation for sick leave as this thing moves forward into the school year. The difficulties in hiring and training additional bus drivers, and the expectation at the school level would be, if I need to do double runs, there's going to be some kids that are going to show up late to school. How are you going to deal with those students that are late to school? How are you going to deal with the students in the building when I can't get there at bell time, but I can get there 30 minutes after that? So that's my challenge moving forward, is to make sure everybody understands what I can and can't do.
Very good. Awesome. Jim?
As a partner to Brad, sometimes I bring the outside perspective, like I have been for a couple of years, longer than that with Brad. But once we have the timeline and the plan in place, my mind sort of drifts to the risk management side of things and saying, to what extent can we maintain the integrity of the plan, and given all the dynamics of what could change and when it might change and how it will impact. But once your plan's in place, you still have to keep your antenna up and kind of have a risk management perspective to say, how am I going to manage things if factor A, B, or C changes significantly. So Brad's, kind of, in the middle of the operation. Sometimes he asks me to step back, and saying, well, how could this go off the rails, and what are we going to do about it? So we try to anticipate the risks going forward. Mike?
Great.
Yeah, and honestly, I was going to say something very similar to that, but in a much less erudite fashion. I mean, to me, this is a roadmap. It's not the roadmap. This is the way Toledo's handling it. It's phenomenal. Thank you both again for sharing this with people and for giving them a way to think about this. But even Google Maps, Waze didn't just come up because nobody needed it, right? I mean, Waze is an alternative way to get someplace when the regular way is not available. So I think within this way of thinking, which is what I would call this, as much as a roadmap, within this way of thinking, realize that there are alternative paths. I mean, you don't always have to take the path of least resistance. I think what Brad and Jim have done here is they've given you an ability to use these tools, to use these resources to say, okay, look at, if we push hard enough on this particular point, we'll force our way through this. I mean, one of the things you both said early on, and we heard in some of our earlier webinars too, was the more you can be proactive as a transportation director, the more you can be out front in this, the better the likelihood is that you'll get the results you want. If you just sit back and wait for someone to bring it to you, you're going to end up losing your mind at the end of the day, right? Be proactive and use this as a bit of a battering ram, frankly, to move in the direction you want to move.
Thank you. That's a great final takeaway. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Learn from the experts and then keep revising. For Brad and Jim, I just want to thank you again so much for a great presentation. Mike, thank you so much for your leadership and NAPT's leadership, especially in this very difficult, challenging time. I want to thank all the people who attended. I want everybody who attended to know that if we did not get to your question, these questions will be sent to Brad and Jim. They spent a lot of time last week addressing all the questions, and they've been posted on, I know they're posted on our website, transfinder.com. I believe they're also on NAPT's. So any question that we did not address will be addressed by them as well. So you guys still have homework, sorry. I wanted to also note that if anybody who's watching this has any stories about how you served your community that could be useful and other districts could learn from you, please share those with us. We have a website. We have an email address, mystory@transfinder.com, and it could make its way into a future webinar or a best practices white paper. And so anything you can share with us, we would love to have that. And then finally, I just wanted to say that we'll be back again next Tuesday, May 19th at 1 p.m. as we continue our best practices series with NAPT. And we're just thankful so much for that great partnership. But until then, hope you all have a really great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Take care. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.
Good, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.